behalf of the Deerfield Beach Historical Society, I welcome you to our first virtual event to be held here at the Deerfield Beach Cultural Center. We are graciously joined with Charles Calello and his wife Clay, who will share his autobiography. And thank you too for our funding sponsors, who without their help during this bold time, we would not have been able to have planned these events and also open the Cultural Center. Their names will be listed at the close of this program.
Hi, I'm Poppy Mercier, and thank you, Emily, for that wonderful introduction for our first program. With me today is Judy Wilson. She's the editor over at the Pelican newspaper. And we happen to be filming in the 1926 building, which was one of the Butler houses right across the street from the Cultural Center. We had some technical difficulties, but we are so happy and so pleased to have the opportunity to be joined by a gentleman who owns the Billboard magazine record for music arranger with more top 10 hits than anyone in the history of pop music. He has recorded and had hit records with Frankie Valli and the Four Seasons, Neil Diamond, Barbra Streisand, Glenn Campbell, Juice Newton, Bruce Springsteen, and many, many more. He's been nominated for 15 Grammys, and he's a Jersey boy, a former member of the Four Seasons, inductee to the Vocal Group Hall of Fame, a composer, a producer, and arranger. Let's welcome Charles Calello and later his wife Clay as we take a look inside the covers of his latest book, Another Season, A Jersey Boy's Journey and Beyond, the memoirs of Charles Calello. Hello, Charles.
How are you, Poppy?
I'm doing just fine, thank you. How are you today?
Pretty good.
Pretty
Enjoying
good.
this wonderful rainy weather we're having.
Oh, I know. It's going to be, well, hopefully it won't rain. Let's put it that way. There's been a little bit too much of that, right?
Right, right.
But I had the chance to read the book, and it's so well written. And thank you so much for sharing it with us. And you probably have had people along the way say to you, Charles, you should write a book. You should write a book. Who or what finally inspired you to go ahead and take on the project?
Well, several years ago, I started to get phone calls and emails from England, from the Four Seasons fan club. And they started to ask me questions about what took place with the early records. And during the conversation, they said, Charles, how come you don't put all of this in a book? So eventually, one of the people involved with the fan club over there took a shot. He says, let me take a shot at writing some of these things down. So he wrote a couple of chapters, and unfortunately he died. And then Clay was the one who actually inspired me to actually pursue getting another writer. And we actually had the book written 3 different times before we actually settled on this version. I didn't like any of the directions prior to this that the writers took it in.
Well, as a teaser for our viewers, do you think that there's a passage that you would be able to share with us from the book itself?
Sure, I could do that. In fact,
great. That'd be wonderful.
I happen to have a copy right here, and as such, I was prepared for such a reading.
That would be so special.
This is part of the overture. It'll give you an overview as to how the book really came about. And it starts talking about November 6, 2005. Charles, the limo will be here in 30 minutes. I heard my wife, but I was lost at the window, hypnotized by the falling rain. A gray mist formed over the filter of the lights, blurring the view of the billboards across the street from the 6th floor of the Marriott Marquis Hotel on Broadway and 44th Street. Hold on, honey, I replied. I was fascinated by the bird's-eye view of the area as I squinted to see up a few blocks up 7th Avenue to the spot where the Stay Phillips recording studio once stood the studio where it all began in 1962 when I started making records with the Four Seasons. In my mind, I could hear the soundtrack being played of the hits we had produced. My wife Clay and I were getting ready to attend the premiere of Jersey Boys, the story of Frankie Valli and the Four Seasons. It took longer for Clay to futz with the tuxedo on me than it took for me to get dressed. It's all about the details, Charles. She wanted me to look my best, knowing that we would be seeing friends, some of whom I hadn't seen for more than 20 years. Looking back, it's hard to believe that I was part of one of the most popular stories in the history of musical theater. Oh, what a career I've had. What a life. Not always successful, certainly not always joyous, sometimes, in fact, downright traumatic, but ultimately leading to lasting love and a night of triumph on Broadway. And to think that it all started back in Newark with a bunch of working class boys who learned how to make beautiful music.
Thank you, Charles. That is definitely the story. Everyone's going to really look forward to having the opportunity to read on. Thank you.
And then the story, Poppy, the story goes on to talk about, we don't badmouth anybody in the book. We actually tell the stories the way I recall them, and to see the success and how it grew. And it's not a book about I, me, about look how terrific I am. It's just a really, really solid story about the success of the Four Seasons and some of the heartbreaks we went through.
Yeah, I found that really, really true, is that it was such an eye-opener. Even though I know a lot of the story, that there's so much that happens behind the scenes that you don't realize, and what it takes to actually bring everything to fruition. So, yeah, I'm glad you wrote it. I am.
Charles, let me ask you. You had 100 songs on the Billboard magazine's Top 100 from the years 63 to 1984. That's an amazing, amazing output. Could you explain briefly how you approach each project as an arranger?
Well, each project really depended upon the artist of the song. And once the artist was decided upon and the song was picked, then you look at it and decide what market we're actually going for. Then to create the music so it fits that marketplace, and not only fits the marketplace, but also makes it possible for it to have the sound of radio, so radio can play the record.
Oh, that's
very interesting.
Yeah. Well, I've heard you speak about the importance of having the formal training that you did in the beginning with the Arts High School, and then also the Manhattan School of Music. In fact, when I was looking through the reviews of your book, there was one reviewer who said, this is a must-read for young people who want to get into the business, because you explained it so well, exactly what had happened. I was wondering, do you have any advice that you would give to an aspiring artist for today?
Well, most of us that get involved in this business, we really don't start looking at it that we're going to hit the jackpot. So if you have a passion for it, the thing that I would recommend is try to tie yourself to someone who is already in motion. Find somebody who's making records or somebody who's actually producing shows. Get to the point where you could be some sort of an assistant or an apprentice to work on developing your craft. And little by little, if it works for you, people will recognize it, and little by little you'll be able to develop and get into the business. But if you have the dream, you have to recognize that sometimes it takes 20 years to make it overnight.
Yeah, and in fact, in the book too, you were describing some of the essential elements of what makes a hit record. I mean, how did it feel to you when you realized and you heard that you had your first hit record? It must have been just an incredible feeling that you had gotten to that point.
Well, to just back up a little bit, the biggest excitement was the first time I heard one of the records I worked on that was played on the radio. I'll never forget it. I was on Fielding-Heisen Avenue in Newark, and I heard the record come out. I wanted to jump out of the car and yell to everybody, "They're playing my record! They're playing my record!"
Yeah.
And then, by the time we recorded with the Four Seasons and we had the first hit, that was exciting. But none of us really knew where it was going to go, if we would have any more hits. So then, the book actually explains about the struggle of going from hit to hit.
Charles, as a very young man, you had an amazing experience of performing with Frankie Valli and the Four Seasons. After that, did it ever occur to you, or during that time, that perhaps you'd want to remain on the stage? You were a fine musician, and you could have had a career performing. Instead, at some point, you chose to go behind the scenes, and as it turned out, it produced for you an absolutely amazing career.
Well, when I joined the Four Seasons, I joined the Four Seasons sort of as a favor, because Nicky left in the middle of a tour, and I got a call from Tommy, and he said that they needed me, and they wanted me to fill in. Now, because I was a Four lover prior to the Four Seasons, I knew most of the music that they were performing. Plus, I made the records, so I knew all Nicky's parts, because I was there making the records from the beginning. So after a 2-hour rehearsal to go on stage was not a big deal. But my heart was really in writing music and making records. And that was really where I wanted to be. So the first opportunity I had to replace myself, I was gone.
So your life worked out very well, did it not?
No complaints.
Okay, well, looking back during that period of time, was there a time that you heard a song that had gone onto the radio and you listened to it that you really truly felt was a signature of your own music? It was a Charles Calello moment, and that people could listen to it and they would start saying, "Ah, yes, that's Charles Calello. I can tell that's something that he worked on, and that's something that he arranged." Do you have any particular song that sort of brought that kind of a feeling to you?
Well, the first time that happened was when I made the record "Dawn Go Away," because the song was not originally written in the style that we actually made the record. It was actually written as a ballad, and it was written sort of like a folk song. And as a result of me talking to Frankie Valli, we wanted to change the feel of it, and I created the entire record, right down to the figures in the beginning, using the sound of the bells, the modulations, the chord changes, everything that took place in that record, I really was responsible for. But then over the years, there were things that actually added to the stamp, writing the "Bum Bum Bum" and "Sweet Caroline," and also writing the introduction to "After the Lovin'" for Engelbert Humperdinck, or writing the introduction and setting the record in place for "My Eyes Adored You." These, I felt, were all Calello style records.
Definitely. Thank you. Yes.
During the time the Four Seasons I think the Four Seasons were pretty much approaching their height. The British invasion occurred, and the Beatles came to America. In your book, you credit the Four Seasons with being one of the groups, and maybe the major group, that held American music together. They kept American music still performing and in the top of the charts. Is that true? Is that how you feel about that? And did you, at that time, go to Beatles concerts? Did you listen to their music? Did you analyze what they were doing?
Well, there was a big difference between the kind of records the Beatles made and the kind of records we made. The Four Seasons were actually on the heels of doo-wop. So we were basically a white R&B group. And the Beatles were a rock and roll band. And they recorded basically rock and roll songs. And the fact that the Four Seasons were able to hold their own through 64, 65, 66, right through pretty much the end of the decade, we held our own against the Beatles, even though the music was changing. And then the resurgence of success starting with My Eyes Adored You, and December '63 and Oh What a Night, which Gaudio composed both those brilliant compositions, you could see that they lasted all the while. The Beatles, up until even the Beatles broke up, they were still having hit records.
Very interesting and good strategy, I think.
Believe me, it wasn't. We didn't plan it.
You didn't plan it.
No strategy. Huh?
Well, thinking of the artists that you did go ahead and produce and arrange for, if we start to throw out a few names, would you just give us maybe some little short stories about maybe the favorite songs that you might have worked with them? Are you ready?
Sure.
Are you ready?
All right.
Well, okay, number one, of course, Frankie Valli and the Four Seasons.
Well, my favorite Frankie Valli record was My Eyes Adored You, and my favorite Four Seasons record was a combination of Dawn and Let's Hang On.
Great.
What about Barbra Streisand?
My Heart Belongs to Me. I actually produced and wrote her first top 5 record that did not come from a motion picture. And that was done in '77. And that was a top 5 record.
And Frank Sinatra?
Watertown.
Wow.
When I was 30 years old, I recorded Frank Sinatra. And I grew up listening to his music. But also something very interesting about it. 11 years earlier than that, I went to a session when I was 18 or 19 years old, where Tony Bennett was recording with Count Basie. And I saw them recording that day with Mitch Miller as the A&R man. And I said, one day I'm going to be doing this. And 11 years later, I was in that same studio recording Frank Sinatra.
Isn't it nice when something that you really want works out and it happens for you? What about Neil Diamond? I think I know what you have to say for Neil Diamond.
Sweet Caroline.
I know. It's my favorite also. It's a perfect song to be singing at a party with a glass of wine.
I loved how you did the public service announcement too for the using Neil Diamond's Bum 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 and unifying the world actually together. That was a very special message. I hope everyone got a chance to see it, but that was really something.
Thank you.
Yeah, we really liked it.
Actually, it was Clay's idea. Clay sort of.
Somehow I don't find that too surprising. I can imagine.
Clay was. You have to do something, you know. And Clay's good with the nudge.
Yeah. And it's a good nudge.
And I have to I do the grunt work.
Okay, so I had a couple artists. Laura Nero.
Eli and the 13th Confession, to this day, is still one of my favorite albums that I've ever done.
Yeah, and then a personal favorite of mine, Barry Manilow.
Daybreak.
A Daybreak, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so Clay. How are you, Clay?
Hi.
Well, it was so touching, really. It was so touching to read how Charles shared his personal life and being introduced to you and your courtship. What was it difficult for you to make the transition from a high-profile fashion industry into a high-energy music industry?
Well, that's an interesting question, and wasn't that nice? All those nice things he said about me. I was so proud of writing the book, but I was really taken back, and thank you for mentioning that, because I really appreciated what you wrote down. But making the transition, actually, it wasn't really difficult because I come from an energetic family. My mom and my sister, and my mom had a business, and she had a fabric store, and she had all these hand-painted silks, and so I was brought up in that environment where I had an appreciation for fashion through her, and then to make that transition, going from fashion to music. I studied ballet most of my life, and living in Boston, growing up in Boston, we always attended the ballet and the opera, and at a very, very young age. So I met a lot of the wonderful ballerinas in my lifetime. I studied with some really wonderful people. And then my stepfather owned a club, and we always had the celebrities every night. There was a different show, and I mean, it was. So I was around that all my life, and then later on we owned a restaurant, so the celebrities would stop by. So it wasn't really a big transition. It was like I was turning the page, just going into another chapter.
That's great. That's great.
Clay, I understand that you are putting Charles' book in an audible format, on disc, on tape.
Yes, actually, I was recording it to start, and then as I was recording it, I said to Charles, this should really be from you. It's your story. No one can tell it better than you can. You lived all of the stories. You have all of the memories. So I did the introduction, and I did a couple of other things in the book, but actually it wasn't difficult to do it, other than it was my husband's book. I mean, I did voiceovers before, so the microphone wasn't really foreign to me. But when you're reading something that your husband wrote, I mean, it's a lot different. but because I really wanted to get it right. But I was so happy that Charles did the audio and on the book and the recording, because it is his story. But I was just very happy to be a small part of the audio.
It sounds like you guys have a very good partnership.
Yes, we do. We're both Italian, so there's a lot of stuff going on. We're both Italian, but we, we work together. We work very well together. We're best friends. We only courted for 2 months, and then we got married. That was 40 years ago, and so you don't really know someone in 2 months, but you really do, and it just has worked out nicely. And there are times we disagree on things, but we're always on the same page.
That's great. And I've learned, by the way, that there was an interesting story, sort of a behind-the-scenes story, of when the two of you were deciding to come to Florida, and that you had made introductions for Charles to become an arranger and a conductor here in South Florida with the Florida Symphonic Pops. So I think this is a great story. Would you share it with us?
Oh, Charles, you want Charles to share?
Charles and you, the two of you both did it. That's for sure.
Okay.
Well, I'll jump in here and take a couple of bars. It started where I was the music director on the Ray Charles 50 Years in Show Business television show. I walked off the stage and I said to my wife, "I'm not going to do this anymore." I said, "It's no longer fun." So we went home, we talked about it, and she says, "I'm tired of this. Well, maybe it's time to move." So I said to Clay that I didn't think that I really wanted to write anymore. So Clay didn't really take that information too seriously, and we decided to move to Florida, and she found out that there was a Pops orchestra here. So she wrote a letter of introduction to the Boca Pops, to the president of the Boca Pops, donating my services. And this is how we actually got involved with the arts down here. So after coming to Florida, we were here for a couple of months, and one day Clay said, "Charles, come on, let's get dressed. We're going to go someplace." And we drove to the Boca Pops. He says, I have an appointment here. So we walk in, and I'll let Clay finish the story.
So I never told Charles that I wrote the letter. So at that time, Mark Azzolina, who was the founder of the Boca Pops, I wrote him the letter, and he was, I guess, leaving, or I don't know exactly why, but he was turned over to someone else. And I got a phone call, and they asked if we could come down. So I was trying to tell Charles, I was trying to break it to him gently, that we had an appointment, and he was saying, "Well, how do we get this appointment? And I went, oh, I wrote them a letter and I volunteered your services to write for them. He said, oh, okay. And that's how it started. We went there. But I didn't tell them until we were actually in the door. So we were actually in the door ready to go in for our appointment. And it was a wonderful relationship that we had with the Boca Pops. And I met some wonderful people, and I ended up doing volunteer work for them in fundraising. And I met a wonderful family called the Grandes. It was Marge and Frank Grande. And also, Ariana Grande is the granddaughter of Marge and Frank Grande, and then Joan is the mother. And so one concert that Charles was doing for them, I'll let you finish this one.
Well, when she was 13 years old, I wrote the first arrangement for Ariana with the Pops when she was 7. And then at the age of 13, at the age of 12, I took her into the recording studio. She shocked the engineer as to how great she was. Then at the age of 13, we put her with the Pops. She sang 8 songs in one of the concerts and just blew the roof off the place. And here it is, 13 years later, she's the biggest star in the world. So Clay, when you take a look at my career and the things that have taken place, Clay has played a major part in some of the direction that has taken me in, especially moving from California here. I never thought that there was another business other than making records, and I wound up having a great time writing for live orchestra. But again, it was back to Clay. Clay really was responsible.
Well, it has been absolutely great for being able to spend this time with the two of you, and anyone who has had the opportunity to see your show, the one that you're talking about, Charles Calello, the Hitman. We're thrilled that you're back on stage and you're conducting, and your music just transcends so many feelings and memories and things to come. And I hope that pretty soon, you know, when times get better and such, as far as with health and stuff, that we can have you come to the Deerfield Beach shores, and we'll be able to share that music again with the people down here in Broward County and Palm Beach County. But anyhow, until that time, I wanted just to tell everyone that you can purchase this book, A Jersey Boy's Journey with the Four Seasons and Beyond, another season, through Amazon.com, or that if you want to purchase it through the Deerfield Beach Historical Society, that Charles and Clay will donate a portion of the book sale back to the Historical Society, which I thank you so much for that. Plus, it'll be personally autographed, so that's a treasure. So thank you again, and we'll look forward to seeing you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you, Poppy.
Bye-bye.
Judy.
Take care.
Ciao.
Ciao.
There's someone standing in the rain, waiting for the morning train. It's gonna be a lonely place without the look of your familiar face. But who can say it's not that way?